Mr. President, the country is going crazy. What is your plan? Release the tiger documentary. Hey, all you cool cats and kittens. To quote the stand-up philosopher John Mulaney, you know those days where you're just like, this might as well happen. Adult life is already so gosh darn weird. And we sure do live in interesting times. Like, okay, seriously, of course this TV show would drop during the great corona plague. Beautiful poetic timing. I mean, listen, I don't want to get into much about my personal life or why my background is different, but needless to say, I had a big impactful interaction, and I found it so baffling that I rewatched this show because I felt like I understood the characters and people in it more than the people in my real life. But, like, do I? Do any of us really have any idea what the hell is going on? Or are we falling back on simplifications and taking the framing of this show for granted so that we can trick ourselves into having some modicum of security in our own worldviews? Or is the social isolation getting to me and I'm starting to overthink everything? No, yeah, that's definitely what's happening, actually.
I saw Tiger, now I understand.
One thing I notice is that a lot of these people have a lot of trauma. Like Joe Exotic's dad, for instance, disowned him for being gay, and he found solace in exotic animals. And that's not an excuse for all of the bad stuff he's done at all. But I can't help but realize that this activity that he probably considered to be therapeutic becomes something he commodifies. And to be fair, the commodification is something of a necessity considering the amount of time it takes to care for these animals and the fact that, we live in a society, bottom text, where you either have to make money or die. And I'm not trying to say that trauma is an excuse for abusing animals or trying to have someone killed or, in Carole's case, allegedly offing someone. I'm also really not trying to say that trauma necessarily leads to such actions. Like, there's plenty of people who've been through similar things who haven't, allegedly killed people or put a hit on someone or treated tigers and employees horribly or written fire diss tracks. But I also can't help but feel like had their personal experiences and circumstances been different, that Carole and Joe wouldn't have hurt so many people and or animals. Like, I don't think that they're inherently evil or that they were destined to be some mean weirdos or whatever. And at the end of the day, it is on them to try to be better people. But I think it's more productive to try to see how we can prevent these conditions that might encourage people to act in certain ways. And at the heart of this strange little series is the conflict between money and calling, or money and your passion. They all argue that they need to pay their employees next to nothing because of the high costs involved in caring for living things that are huge and require a lot of sustenance and care. Like, for example, Joe started out being against the breeding of tigers, but years later, Joe argues that he needs to breed tigers because that's where the money is, and he needs that money to care for them. On the other hand, Carole is all into breeding when she's under her husband's thumb, but after he mysteriously disappears and she has tons of money, she's above that sort of thing. But let's take the whole idea that Carole allegedly killed her second husband. If Carole's husband divorced her and took all of that money, where would that leave her? Where would that leave her big cats? Her and her husband clearly had different ideas about how to treat them and how to approach them. He was more of a collector and she allegedly just wanted to rescue them. My point being, did Carole really feel like she had another option, just monetarily? Because in her mind, I can see her having a fear that her and her tigers end up destitute or under the control of somebody else. And I'm not saying that that makes murder okay, if she allegedly. But I can't imagine Carole having that crisis between her life's calling, her big cat rescue, and money. And I can imagine her thinking that this is her and her tiger's only chance, so let's bust out the sardine oil. I'm not saying it's right, but I see the logic that leads to that. And I see the logic that leads Joe to feed his animals and employees expired Walmart meat. But now that Carole has all of this money, she's apparently using it to hurt people. Her dead husband's family said that they were scared to talk about the case because she has the money to sue and she'll wield that over people. And that's not to mention all the money she makes while her volunteers work for free. Like, there's one point where a volunteer is saying, "I don't take Christmas off," and laughing while Carole Baskin, that bitch, is just staring at her with so much intensity.
The ownership of money and property comes from doing things in a certain way.
The way that Carole makes money off of her rescue, while trying to appear as if it's more of a charity than a business, is part of Joe Exotic's expired Walmart beef with her. Which is really interesting because there's definitely a rabbit hole of people using foundations and the aesthetics of charity really just for their own personal gain. Maggie Mae Fish has a great video on how Jacylyn Hill does it. Another Slice has a great video on how Bill Gates does it. Ozark season 3 kind of even plays with the concept, but Carole isn't hiding it very well. And what she's doing gives off the feeling of hypocrisy and injustice. And I think that's a huge part of the vitriol against her. This Carole hate stems largely from how she acts like she's the one good person. She's self-righteous, and people hate self-righteousness, especially when they feel it's so undeserved. It's this idea that Carole keeps getting away with things that other people don't get away with. Like, nobody should be arguing to free Joe Exotic. He did the things he was accused of. But I think that part of the push to free him is this feeling that his punishment doesn't fit his crime. Meanwhile, Carole is not only seemingly getting away with a lot, but she's thriving. She's got money, she's got people just volunteering for her, and people acting like she's the Mother Teresa of big cats, which is pretty funny because Mother Teresa, wasn't great. That being said, while the memes can be funny, people are going way too far with it. I'm in this Tiger King meme group, and people are texting their number neighbors, people who have a phone number 1 digit off from theirs, and they're like, "Hey, what do you think about that bitch Carole Baskin? Did she kill her husband?" And let's not. Honestly, she should just lean into the whole "that bitch Carole Baskin" thing. I just took a DNA test. And honestly, everything she's done, and even if she did kill her husband, is she really worse than Doc Antle?
So I'm Dr. Bhagavan Antle, Bhagavan, Antle, A-N-T-L-E, Dr. Bhagavan Antle.
Doc Antle is gross. His employees start when they're teenagers, and then he dates them? Sounds like grooming to me, dude. Who are you, Onision? Get Chris Hansen in on this shit. Barbara Fisher, that girl was in a cult. She was a naive teenager when she joined who thought, "Ooh, this'll be fun and enlightening. I get to live with tigers." And then this dude grooms her and dates her and just kind of gets her a boob job. It sounds like the Sea Org in Scientology, which is really funny because now Carole has these websites up that are the truth about Tiger King, and they remind me of Scientology's websites against their detractors, Leah Remini or whoever. Doc Antle's relationships with his workers are also disturbing regardless of their ages because there's an inherent boss-worker power dynamic. What if you turn him down? He's your boss. He can fire you. Then because Joe Exotic is looking at Doc Antle as a role model, he furthers that cycle. Joe's following the lead and mores of this specific subculture as written by Doc Antle, meaning he probably doesn't even get what's so wrong about all of this. When the moon hits your eye like an expired Walmart pizza pie, that's amore. When the boss is a wreck, gives you tigers and meth, that is more. But tip for employers, don't ask your employees what kind of porn they watch and then try to deduce their sexuality from that. Don't date your employees, especially ones way younger than you. Don't keep them around with meth and exotic animals. I can't believe this needs to be said.
Magic.
I think all of the twists and the drama really makes you feel this strong sense that an injustice has been committed in some way. Something about all of these situations is just unfair, and that feeling of unfairness is very powerful in stories. Take Breaking Bad. Like, I think Breaking Bad was one of the best shows of all time, in part because there's that heightened sense of, oh, well, that's really unfair that it had to play out like that. And that's part of why this story caught everyone's attention. Like, yeah, of course, they're all so damn weird, but underlying that, there's this feeling that their weirdness is a performance to cover up injustice. Like, if you're preoccupied with the, haha, this weirdly dressed mullet man ran for president and made expired Walmart meat truck pizza, then you aren't thinking, hey, was Travis feeling abused? Was Joe taking advantage of his workers who were ex-cons who didn't feel like they had any other option? Did Joe really just set fire to Michael Jackson's alligators? Yeah, because apparently I guess those alligators were Michael Jackson's and it didn't even mention it. This is so damn weird. I also can't help but wonder, is Joe even mature enough or self-aware enough to understand that what he was doing was wrong? Like, did he even get that his husbands, especially Travis, were unhappy and needed help, not more meth? I'm not entirely sure. Maybe there's a sense that Joe didn't mean to do those bad things among a lot of the viewers and people who want him freed. Like Cardi B. What I do know is that the intense reactions of these audiences aren't usually simply a result of the characters, or in a docuseries or reality show, the person's actions. And if they are, we have to consider that the person's actions that we see are picked and chosen by producers and directors and editors who are trying to tell the most compelling story. Sarah Z, she's Canadian, talks about this in response to RuPaul's Drag Race, how a person is contextualized by the editing process, which can cause a storm of hate to come their way. We're seeing Carole Baskin's actions through the frame that the creators of this TV show set up. And that's not to say that she hasn't done anything bad or worth criticizing, but it is to say that despite what we might think, we only have a fraction of the knowledge of what actually happened. And at the end of the day, we can only ever speculate what's going on in her mind. You are not immune to propaganda or to reality TV show editing.
Hey, Carole. It's a voice from your past.
Theory Pleeb has a video about the show that brings up how Carole is like Hillary Clinton and Joe is like Donald Trump, and I didn't even realize that, but it's so true. We have more concrete proof of Joe's wrongdoings, and he's so much weirder, but Carole gives off these sketchy vibes and is put on a pedestal that she probably doesn't deserve by mostly white women. There's a refuge in Joe Exotic's oddness. Not to mention his aesthetic of disregarding elitism, despite how much money he might have actually had. And the performative anti-elitism reminds me of Trump talking about draining the swamp, even though, like, he is the swamp? He's a billionaire, like, he is the elite. Yeah, I didn't really have one specific point of this. I just needed to talk about this weird show. So, don't text random strangers asking them if they think that Carole Baskin killed her husband. That's weird. Do the YouTube stuff if you want, or don't. It's your life. Follow me on Twitter and maybe I'll start live tweeting things, but probably not. Bye. Oh, here, kitty, kitty. Mama's got some treats for you. Oh, here, kitty, kitty. You can't find this taste in the zoo. Oh, here, kitty, kitty. Mama Carole sure loves you. Oh, here, kitty, kitty. Mama made this for you. Like and subscribe.